you not entertained?
Yes, sir! We'll have a real good time!
He's Dave, and I'm Dallas, and this is Vintertainment. We have opinions on just about everything. Sometimes those opinions are spot on. Sometimes they go down easier with a glass of wine. This is Vintertainment, the wine and entertainment pairing podcast.
Are you not Vintertained? Welcome, everyone, to the glowing inaugural first full episode of Vintertainment, formerly known as the Wine and Pairing Podcast, here at
No, not really.
Wait, what happened?
Okay, never mind. Go ahead and start over. You said Vintertainment. I said woo. You said wine and. I was like, boo. Yeah, that name sucks.
I just heard you in the background go, wait.
That's why we changed it. That name sucks. Who came up with that name? What a loser.
Indeed.
It was me, folks. It was me. It was me.
It was us. We did.
Vintertainment
We
is Dallas's. Wine and was me.
Anyhow, are you not Vintertained? Welcome, everyone, to the glowing inaugural and first full episode of Vintertainment, formerly known as the Wine and Pairing Podcast. Hold for booze from Dave.
Nope. That's going to be an excerpt at the end.
Here at Vintertainment, we delude ourselves into thinking that you want to hear the curious and often insightful blabber that we spew about all things wine and entertainment, because we know that deep down in the very marrow of your bones, you need to be Vintertained. Okay, I promise that's the last time I will make that pun. Anyway, at the end of the day, who knows anything about wine? Furthermore, who knows anything about entertainment? We sure don't. Well, that's not totally true. We know what we know, and we know what we like, and we can help you find the best pairing for whatever it is you're planning to read, watch, or listen to.
Now, but before we get to the Vintertainment, why don't you smash those subscribe, follow, and like buttons? It's how any podcast grows, reaches new listeners. Also, please leave a rating and or review, at least if you're going to leave a nice one. Those help our egos grow and reach new eyes and ears. If you want to leave a negative one, don't. Just email us instead. wineandpod. It's still the old email. We haven't created a new one yet. So wine, the letter N, P-O-D, @gmail.com. You can send it to us there. If you want to say something nasty, we'll take it into consideration. Hopefully improve if you really hate this show.
That's right. And then you can come get wordy with us over at vintertainmentstudios.com. That's vintertainmentstudios.com, which is our home base over on Substack, where you'll find all the episodes, directories of pairings, weekly articles on additional wine and entertainment pairings, collabs with other independent writers of both wine and entertainment, and all sorts of other content. I hate that word, but it's necessary to tickle your fancy. And feel free to become a paid subscriber of the Substack, because we like it when you become a paid subscriber of the Substack and unlock paid-only benefits like uncut interviews and a host of other fantastic
stuff. Dallas has no idea. He's like, what do we offer people? I don't know. Who fucking knows? We do. You can, if you become a paid subscriber, which, by the way, the paid subscription right now on Substack is only $2 a month. Great. So you can support us very easily for very little money. We know these days with all the Patreons, with all the Substacks, with all the crowdfunding, it's very hard to support independent voices in media right now. So we want to let you spread that money to as many people as possible. So just $2 a month. I'm already going to forget what the annual rate for that. I think it's $20 a year. So a little bit less. Substack makes it very hard to set these prices. Yeah. You have to give it as discounts. It's weird. But anyways, I've set it to where it's very affordable, where you can support us and keep supporting all your other people. It's not going to break your bank. So that is what is going on. We're going to have a Substack post regaling everyone with our current subscription options. And that should be dropping later this week or early next when this episode, either right after this episode drops or right before. But the prices are already set. So that is what it costs. And you can unlock, yes, the uncut interviews. You will also uncut subscriber polls, subscriber chats. You will be able to have pairing directories that break down all the different pairings we've ever done historically for all the different pieces of entertainment. And those are only available to paid subscribers. So you can always go back and you don't have to listen to every single episode of this podcast to find them out.
Yes, you all
Yes,
do.
you do. Damn it. Sorry. I'm getting in Dallas's way. I'm ruining everything here. But now, today's episode is brought to you by the Funk, the king of punk funk. In fact, none other than Rick James in the form of the book Glow, the autobiography of Rick James with David Ritz, which, not incidentally, was selected by one of our subscriber polls, which going forward, you better be a paid subscriber if you want to help us choose what it is we're going to cover.
All right. Glow, the autobiography of Rick James with David Ritz, was released in 2007 by Simon & Schuster and documents the life of Rick James, a.k.a. James Ambrose Johnson Jr., who was born February 1st, 1948 in Buffalo, New York, who would go on to become an iconic American musician, singer, songwriter, and producer best known for his fusion of funk, soul, and his meteoric fame in the 1970s and 80s. Considered to be either prodigy or genius by many, James's personal life would often overshadow his artistic accomplishments. The book is co-written by David Ritz, whose resume of black and soul biographies and autobiographies is long and storied, including pieces on or with Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Ray Charles, and The Temptations. But before we get to the book, let's see what we're pairing. Dave, what you got, buddy?
Well, we're going to give hints of what we're pairing. That is the current iteration of this show, where we're going to give hints up front.
Tease the people.
See if you can, tease you. See if you can guess what it is. I mean, it's really hard. There's so much fucking wine out there in the world. So many beverages. But see if you can get in the right ballpark of what it is we're talking about, and we'll reveal the actual specific wine at the very end. So for me, I am sipping and I paired with not just this autobiography, but with Rick James's discography. I think this is what you drink with his music, whether you're listening to any of his records or whether you are reading about how he created all these records and what his life was like during all that time. I've got a red wine blend. In fact, the best-selling red wine blend in America that sells for over $25. And it has held that status for a decade running now. It's a jam session. It is jammy, so it is a jam session in all meanings of the word. But it's a jam session of different red grapes, which is a lot of what Rick James's music is. It pulls all these different influences, especially for the time. I think listening to Rick James's music now, there's a lot of times you're listening to it and you're like, how was this exactly groundbreaking? But you have to remember, at the time, he was coming into Motown Records, and this music was pulling in influences and reorchestrating them in ways that hadn't really been done before. So, James and Prince were kind of coming up at roughly the same time, and they were breaking a lot of boundaries independently of each other. James got there slightly before Prince, so he kind of fucking hates Prince, and Prince kind of fucking hates him. They were like those peers that were warring it out, duking it out for who was going to change black music the most at that time. And so this is a jam session of different red grapes. It's sweet, silky, and sexy, just like Rick James himself. And it is thematically very on point for Rick's story, as we'll discuss in just a few moments here. Dallas, what do you got?
All right. The wine I chose is Vibrant. It's a red blend firmly rooted in the California winemaking expression. It has a nod to the old world style. It is unapologetic, not unlike James himself. And it's also very unfiltered and full of raw fruit expression. Direct quote from some of the literature on this wine. Again, yes. Just like Rick James.
Yes. I will say I was almost certain I was going to have to pick something similar to what you just described because and funk. Right? It's like punk funk. Absolutely. And I'm like, well, it's going to be a punk ass, funky ass wine, isn't it going to be? But you know what? I went a different direction in the ultimate end. But yeah, go ahead.
Nice. And the winemakers are Eric Sussman and Joel Burt. For any of you people out there who are really into the culture of wine, those two names might be very familiar to you. So that's
They
my
might. They
hint.
might.
All right, Dave.
And if you've ever
go ahead.
seen the documentary Blood into Wine,
That's right.
that
That's
was they feature prominently there. They are winemakers themselves these days, and they show up as, and yeah, they're very funny in Blood into Wine. They have a great shtick all throughout. So look that up. I believe it's on Tubi for free right
It's on
now,
Tubi now.
or the Roku channel. One of those two, maybe both. Who knows?
Probably.
But go look that documentary up. It's great. It's a great documentary. Anyway,
Real quick, Dave. What was your history with? I'll start with Rick James, and then the book. Had you ever heard of the book, or what was your familiarity with James?
so I hadn't heard of the book, which is not so. I mean, it was not surprising to know that Rick James had an autobiography that was published. Like most celebrities of his caliber,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, of course, there's a fucking biography somewhere out there, kind of a thing. And in fact, this book that I'm sure you're going to get to this here, but Glow is the second autobiography of Rick James that came out. They kind of rushed one out right at the time of his death.
Mm-hmm.
And then this was the better, more like, the guy who was helping Rick write his autobiography was like, this was not ready when it was pushed out the door originally. And Glow is the version that is quote unquote ready. Now, funnily enough, I am pretty sure, like, was I aware of the song Super Freak by Rick James? Yes, I was. I grew up with MC Hammer, so I remember that whole, like, you can't touch this. That is a sampling that do 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 do. That was a sampling of Super Freak, and which MC Hammer like barely credited, and so Rick James sued him and actually won because it was so obviously the music of Super Freak. Now, that said, I am pretty sure while reading this book, I listened to Rick James's entire discography front to back as he would talk about recording something, and I went all the way back.
Yeah.
I listened to the few songs of the Mina Birds.
Mm-hmm.
When he was doing that in Motown in his early years, the Great White Cane album that came out, and then everything of his solo career that was popping out. I even tried to listen to a little bit of the Tina. Oh, I'm going to forget her last name, but the ones he produced.
Tina Marie.
Listened to some Tina Marie. So while I was reading this book, I listened to all his albums, and I gotta say, I kind of suspected this might be the case, but I was still a little surprised. I was not familiar with a single other song outside of Super Freak. Not one. All his other big hits, which were big hits back in the day, especially his first album, his debut solo album, The You and I, no, was not familiar. I was just like, nope, this is the first time I'm listening to any of this shit as far as I can tell. First time I think I obviously had never listened to a Rick James album before, but I've listened to them all now, but that's my background. How about you?
Yeah, Rick James, I had some aunts, and it's curious. A lot of our music taste is shaped by the people who are the generation right above us, of course, as children at least, in general. It's the music that's around you as a child, that's sort of just in the ethos, in the atmosphere. And for me, growing up in the 80s, funk music was really popular because it was the music of celebration. It was the music of Friday evening when everybody worked really hard all week and they just wanted to let their hair down. Saturdays, they put on their funk records. And it was all extraordinarily instrument-centric. It was about people who were innovating on their guitars, on their basses, on the drum kits. They were influenced heavily by Motown, of course, by rock music, by gospel music, by all the sort of things going on around them. And funk in general became this sort of fusion of the old world and then this sort of like launching into the future, because they started to just innovate in ways that had never been seen before. I mean, it was just kind of a mind-blowing little period in music. And so Rick James, being the punk funk god, I knew lots of those songs. I should say I heard lots of those songs. I have one of those memories where I can hear a tune once and it never goes away. Trust me, it's the bane of my goddamn existence. So, it'd be, I remember the first time hearing a Jones Girls, I think it was a Jones Girls, which is one of the bands that he produced.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time as an adult hearing one of those songs, knowing the entire scan of the song, having no idea what the song was about, the lyrics or anything. And I was like, God, I know this. I know every note of this. What is this? And so, it's like, oh, okay, Rick James.
Yeah.
All right, that would be why. So I was very familiar with Rick James. And the book, pre-COVID, I got into this autobiography kind of era where I was really interested in reading autobiographies of people that I didn't necessarily know a lot about. And Rick James was on that list. So I made this sort of long list. Rick James was in there, a couple of producers from Old World Hollywood, some rock guys, Anthony Kiedis, lots of people. And this was one that I never got to. And, when we started last year thinking about, where to go and what other entertainment pairings we could do, this was on that list. And it's a dynamic American character for, good or bad.
Yeah.
He's a complex character who created some great things, did some great things, but in his personal life, he was also a son of a gun, as many people would call him. So
he
was
something. He was a frustrating character to follow. I will say that for me,
okay,
personally,
why?
Because he was, and even though he admits, and of course, when writing this book or penning the parts that he himself wrote, which according to the biographer, while he was in prison, he would write certain things. Spoiler alert, while he was in prison.
There was prison, guys.
Yeah, there was lots of prison. This is part of what was so frustrating with him, is he would run afoul of the law constantly in very impulsive ways, often only talked into serving time and turning himself in or things like that due to family or friends that were like, dude, just go take care of this. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world. Get it done. Come back. We'll figure it out. He has such an insane number of things that he does. Joins the military, disses the military, is thrown into prison for dissing the military, is making music, is running away to Toronto, coming back to Buffalo, going to Los Angeles, coming back. He's like, I'm getting nowhere in life. And at one point, I remember we were fairly deep into the book, and he's like, all my other peers are making music, making albums. I'm not making anything. I keep having to like go to jail for like a year and a half to like do my time. And even while he's in jail, he's like doing his time. He only has a touch of time left. He breaks out. I'm like, what is fucking wrong with you? You are so close to finally putting this behind you. And he's like, and someone offered that they can figure out how to break out. And he's like, let's do it. I'm like, don't you have like 2 months left and you've already done most of it? Like, what are you doing? And the best part is he's like, I'm getting nowhere. He's done all these things. And he's like, I'm 24.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. So on the one hand, you're like, okay, you're so young, so impulsive. I kind of get it. But at the same time, he's so impatient. He's so insanely impatient about everything. At one point, I remember he's like, he can't get work. The music thing isn't really, he has not broken out yet. So he's like, he goes to Colombia to do or it was Colombia to become a drug dealer, and he just does. And he goes there, and then on the way back to the States, he's like hiding drugs in his bow tie. It's like in the center of his bow tie that he's hidden, right? And he's going through the airport. He's selected for a strip search. So he strip searches, he's sweating bullets. He's like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Now, the only thing on his person is that little bit of drugs in his bow tie, which was this last little bit of drugs that he just would not leave behind. And so the rest is in his luggage, which they're not searching. They're just searching him. But at one point, he does the strip search. They're like, okay, put your clothes back on. He's like, oh, thank God. As he's putting the bow tie back on, the security guy's like, wait, let me see the bow tie. And he's like, fuck. And this is a guy who's already done prison, right? Like he's already, this will be very bad for him. So thankfully, the security guard takes the bow tie, only searches the strap that, connects the bow tie, does not untie the bow tie.
Right.
He's like, okay, you're clear, gives it back to him. And I'm thinking in my head at this moment, okay, Jesus Christ, Rick, let that be the end of it. That was almost you done, right? Like just done. And what does Rick write in the book? He's like, I felt invincible. They were never going to catch me. I'm like, fuck, what is wrong with you?
Right.
What is wrong with you? So he is such a frustrating individual because he takes the wrong lesson from everything. The warnings, the issues, the problems mount and mount. He winds up having, just to jump a tiny bit ahead, but like throughout his entire music career, not only did he have poor impulse control, like this leads to alcohol addiction, to drug addiction. The drug addiction mounts from where it's like it's marijuana, then it's cocaine, then it's freebasing. And it's like he goes way down the deep end and can never, ever pull himself out, right. Which is ultimately, like going to prison is the only way he got clean, right. Is because he had to get clean by going there. He even goes to rehab centers, gets clean, and falls back into his old habits. That's over right. And over again. He cannot bring himself to live a semi-sober lifestyle. And this is ultimately like just slight spoilers, and then I'll throw it back to you here, Dallas, but he even like this, even though he was kind of semi-sober in the final years of his life post-prison, like the damage was mostly done. And even so, he had issues, he had strokes, he finally died of a heart attack. And during the autopsy, while he didn't have any hard drugs in him, he did have a lot of like this medley of small things that he was on. Like he could never fully just live life without, I think, that feeling of being invincible. Like he always had to have something helping him feel more than human, more than just your day-to-day, especially aging human, where it's like, yeah, you ain't in your 20s anymore, man. And that doesn't feel the same no matter. And even touring is going to be hard. And I feel like he was just that guy who, like, he wanted to be superhuman for his whole life and refused to allow himself to be anything else. So anyways,
to an extent, I think in terms of really serious addiction, and also how early a person is exposed to addiction often, and depression and all that other stuff, a lot of addicts find it difficult to feel normal without the assistance, right? And 100%. So that idea of him in his early years creating, and because he was such a just wonderfully creative and person, like I said, so many, and many people who discuss him in terms of prodigy or genius. And when he went off to my favorite part of the book is when he went off to Toronto. And he's playing with was it Joni Mitchell and all these people, and he's revealing all these candid conversations and how these acts that would go on to become just monster stars, were basically just guys who looked at him in wonder, and at 23, 24 years old, he's sort of looking around and going, wait a minute, I'm better than everyone here. I'm better than everyone who's becoming a star.
But that impulse control got him every single time.
Absolutely, 100%. At its core, the lack of ability to control the impulse is often a part of the equation when it comes to addiction, part of the equation when it comes to self-sabotage. It always is there. And unless you sort of address that early on, it's always going to be there. And what he managed to accomplish, and the other thing we can't discount here, and I've seen it in so many autobiographies and so many sort of illustrations of drug addiction, particularly with rock musicians and actors and people who are in entertainment, is often they attribute their creativity and success to uh, the drug, the sort
Right.
of the experience of the drug. And once you get into that cycle, it is so difficult to break because the industry itself has incentivized drug use. I mean,
Yes.
it's no secret.
It probably was a well-kept secret back then. It's not anymore.
Right.
Like the way these bands
Right.
tour constantly, the way they do,
Right.
when they are that type of mega band,
Right.
is all it. There are substances helping them
100%.
live that life, and it's not just like because that makes us feel good. It's like it's how you can do a concert every fucking night,
Every night
for
in a different
months
city.
on
Yeah.
end, and sometimes twice in a day,
Yeah.
right? And it's like you are performing. I've just done like some musical theater and shit like
Yeah.
that, and like it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It is beyond. You are dead to the world the next morning. I remember reading an interview with Elton John where he was like, I would do a nighttime show,
Mhm.
and like the next morning when he woke up, it's like he could barely, like, light hurt his eyes.
right.
He was so like everything hurt. His throat was raw. He needed like all this tea. He wouldn't talk for hours to
Mhm.
save his voice for the next show coming up. And it's like it takes more out of you if you've never truly performed
Yeah.
to a live audience, with all your heart and soul, which is what you have to do in every single performance for the most part. It's like it's a lot, man.
So drugs
It's too
at
much.
that point become about maintenance, and the infrastructure of Hollywood music and entertainment is
Yeah.
such that a lot of these guys have record companies or labels or brass around them who are a never-ending source of these sort
Yep.
of maintenance
Yep.
drugs. So it is a cycle that once you're in it, it takes a mammoth effort from God and everyone in order to get you to kind of break the cycle. So
Yeah.
so that's just sort of an
Though-
asterisk on the life. Anyway,
Yes.
go for
Yeah.
it.
Two things I did want to mention about the Prodigy thing that you mentioned is one thing that was quote unquote frustrating, but also kind of eye opening is, this is an autobiography from Rick James himself, and he never takes a moment to talk about learning music in any way, shape, or form. Right? It's like he goes from like, oh, I listened to this record. I like music. I could do that.
That's right.
And next thing you know, he's like, and I'm drumming and I'm playing guitar
That's right.
and I'm playing the piano. And I'm like, wait, where there's something missing in
No.
that. Like he never for a moment is like, I had to learn basic chord structure. I had to learn like, what do my fingers even do on a guitar? Who fucking knows? Apparently he just watched people play,
Yeah.
listened to them play. And I'm sure there is a little bit missing from this book in terms of like, I'm sure there was somewhat of a learning curve and whatnot, but he is plainly that person that he would listen to drums, sit down at a drum set. I think drums are what he really started with. And like, not only could learn how to play, but then like learn how to play at a jazz level with drums. Like he had that innate ability. And then even things like guitar and piano, like these were so shrug-worthy. The learning of them were so shrug-worthy to him that he does not talk about it at all. He just suddenly one day he's playing piano and guitar and you're like, the fucks, man? Wait, how did we get here? And so I do think that is indicative of how much of a natural talent he was. Now, that said, there are his early bands. I really love that Great White Cane album
That's
he
fun,
did
right?
prior
That's
to
fun.
his solo career.
That's fun.
I can hear it's almost like if his solo career was punk funk, this was like prog funk. Where they're much more they're longer songs, different acts, different structures, lots of crazy instrumentation going on throughout it. Personally, much more interesting than his pop music that really took off later. I like it a lot. Now I can hear he said that the producer really screwed with it and made it not that great. You can hear it, like every song is like 10 minutes long and still fades out and doesn't come to an end. And so you're like, okay, wow. The producer was like, plainly these are not the complete songs and they were heavily manipulated. But what is there is still really good and really interesting. I wish we had more of that, because when he gets to his punk funk, my biggest complaint with that music is, well, one thing, Rick, from like, we could talk about impulse control, but also Rick had an issue with, like, and he brings this up once or twice even in the book, where where other people took him to task for this, where it's like all he does is have sex and do drugs. Like, that's what he does, and it's all he sings about.
His sort of the zenith of his career, much of that stuff is absolutely unequivocally about his hedonistic, either informed by his hedonistic lifestyle, or it becomes sort of the soundtrack. And he's actually gone on the record as saying a lot of the sex and drugs and rock and roll, he felt he had to sort of engage in order to find new things to write about from that perspective, because that's what people expected.
Yeah, but nonetheless, like, going through his whole discography, I mean, that was one of the things, is album after album, sometimes the music would be a little more interesting, like the music itself, but man, he's not a lyricist. I wish he could have found a lyricist to work with that was a little more interesting than he ultimately was, because like the sex and drugs, I'm like, and another album about sex and drugs and loving. But even love was something I think he really struggled to define for himself, because outside of sex, because he was like, oh, I love you. Oh, you want me to have impulse control though, because I love you. That's a problem for me. And I'm like, well, then that loving, that's strong, man. If you really can't get it together for this person, he's one of those people that maybe if he could have done an open relationship, it would have, like, he's plainly an open relationship kind of person. Okay. But
that's going to be the quote of this episode.
Seriously,
Rick
though,
James, Rick James is a good candidate for open relationships. Clearly.
Yes, because he would love someone and be committed to them at a certain level, but he could not stop sleeping around, right? No. Because of the impulse. And it's like, he wouldn't go out with that as the goal of the evening, but then he'd just go out and be like, whatever happens, happens. Right. And he could not stop himself from the whatever happens, happens.
There's the impulse. And that is purely the impulse.
Yes.
Control. Yeah.
And he would even, like, there were times when again, I wanted to throttle him so many times in reading this book, but there would be times too where he would be like, I'm writing this album and I want to record this song, and Tina Marie was sick at that moment. It's like, you could have waited 1 week and she would have been fine. And he's like, I'm looking for another singer, like, that day. And then she has to come in and sing the song while sick, because she's like, no, I'm so sorry, I'm coming. And he would do that all the time with people that were meaningful in his life.
So just a side note here. Yes, absolutely. You're correct. 100%. But one of the things about Rick's sort of quote unquote, and genius is relative, right? The people around him were accustomed to the chaos as a part of the machinery of Rick James. And Tina Marie, notoriously is well accustomed to the chaos of the machinery. But one little side note about that song is called Fire and Desire, and it's one of those songs.
Which is insane. It's so good.
Is a fucking insane
It is the best singing he's ever done as well.
It is an insane song. Like,
both of them are just singing their fucking hearts out.
It's going to be, it's still a timeless song. I mean, there are places you play that. I mean, honestly, I think most people over the age of 60 probably recognize the song because it was a hit and it was just a great song. But that recording, the producer apparently told her that Rick was looking for another singer or something. He's like, and she was dead tired, dead sick, got up, came, recorded that song. This is the important part, guys, because she too is another one who has had the term prodigy and genius associated with her, because she's also another monster musician. But she recorded that in one take and then immediately went back to bed for a week with her sickness. And it's fascinating. Great song. So go check that out, guys. Fire and Desire.
Oh, God, yes. Fire and Desire is probably the best virtuosic song. Like, those performances are just insane. But he would do this to people all the time, where he's like, you're with me, you're my person, da 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 da. And the moment they had to say, like, not even no to him, but just like, this exact second doesn't work for me, he's like, okay, I'm going to go do it with someone else then. And like zero patience for anything ever. So there was that part of him that seemed, and he seemed a little oblivious to that being an asshole trait, right? Like he did not define it as that. He was like a little like, if someone did that to him, he'd take issue like in a heartbeat. But him doing it to other people, just he was a little like, so yeah, he's a frustrating character, talented but frustrating, and a little pigeonhole. I feel like he pigeonholed himself.
Well, his
in that
success
whole sex and
definitely
drugs
did.
thing.
His success just no one else wanted to hear anything else from him because he became the sort of god of this genre. And you know,
and when he did push himself a little bit, like the Flag album, I think is one of my favorite albums that he did. He was on the way out. He was in decline at that point, so people weren't really listening to him anymore, and the album didn't do well. But that was the first album where I was like, oh, you're trying something different, and it's working. Like, it's not brilliant, but it's good. It's at least very solid. And honestly, by the time I was done listening to all his Sex and Drugs album, I'm like, oh, thank God. It was like a lifeline for me. I was like, you can do something else if you just push yourself. And then the post-prison albums are actually quite interesting and good as well.
He's got lots of interesting things to say once he acknowledges that the sort of punk funk god of it all was an area he was sort of pigeonholed, like you said, pigeonholed in. And you know, a lot of that stuff that came later is just, it's great. He's such interesting things to say, and, you know, perspectives, and musically he's trying new things. Like there's when he starts to get into some of the rap era stuff, you know, there's some spoken word stuff popping up. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So let's talk about the book itself now a little bit in detail. I feel like my part right here, we've already really discussed just now, but go ahead and Dallas, jump in with your bit here about the book and Rick James and David Ritz and where this book comes from, what it's about, what it does. So let's talk about the book in specific.
All right. So Glow, the autobiography of Rick James with David Ritz, is a deeply personal account of seminal events in the life of Rick James. The book is not simply a chronology, but is in fact a diary of personal accounts in the life of this, as we've already stated, complex individual who has lived many lives, as they say. The collaboration between Ritz and James began when Ritz was asked to write an essay to accompany a multi-CD review of James's work. Ritz has gone on record stating that James was very reluctant to write the book at first, but sweetened on the idea after realizing that he had never definitively told his own story. And throughout the process, James was as open and honest as he could be, which scared a lot of people. Ritz recorded many hours of very candid conversations between he and James for the book, some of which took place while James was actually incarcerated. The book essentially breaks down into 6 primary sections that kind of meander through James's life, not unlike a funk tune. Anyway, so we're going to start with his early life. Any takeaways from his early life, Dave? Just real quick, the overview of the book is that it discusses his life growing up in Buffalo, where he's attached to his mother and the characters he spent time around that influenced the behavior, all that good stuff, and kind of initially where he got those germs of musicality and expression from.
Yeah, no, just that impulse control because of running afoul of the Navy, going to prison, escaping from prison when he had already served most of the time, which wasn't a lot of time, and the sheer impatience. Well, also, yes, that also acknowledging that prodigy element where it's like he just seems to keep showing up and playing fucking instruments at major bars and venues, and you're like, you went from never touching an instrument to playing them. I'm like, have you skipped something here or am I missing something? And we don't know because he just doesn't talk about it. But the fact that the timeline is so condensed one way or the other, whether he's skipping that little bit of learning, it was a fast learning curve. He glommed onto this stuff at an insane pace that none of us could really match.
And
So,
that's
my takeaway.
when people started to realize that, that's when the idea of genius and prodigy came in, because that's essentially what prodigy is, right? It's
Right.
having this sort of acumen that isn't accessible to everyone else, or to somehow sort of advanced. And
Right.
and he definitely had that. My God, he definitely had that. And that makes me also, and I think about other prodigies like Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, who also have similar stories in their background, where it's called ear training, of course, and they would just hear a thing, and that then became the basis of the musicality that was the bass line, and they could sort of just build from that, which is just a magical concept, first of all. But anyway, the next section is Rise to Fame. This is the sort of insider's look at the breakout years when his creativity was flowing and the desire was ravenous in the 60s and 70s. This area sort of peels back the curtain on some of his famous hit recording sessions, like Give It To Me Baby, Super Freak, and the dynamics between other industry giants and personalities like the guys from Motown and I think Columbia Records. Thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, also this is a good cautionary tale, or not cautionary tale, a good remembering that Super Freak, right? It was a song, his biggest hit, period, like across everything. And
Huge.
it was
Monster
yes.
fucking hit.
And it was kind of just an accidental
That's right.
song.
That's right.
He was just sitting there listening to other recordings in the studio, listening to the tracks for what this album was going to be, and he was just fiddling around on his guitar and started playing that little do 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 do. He was just absentmindedly doing it, and the guy next to him was like, "That's really catchy.
Yeah.
That's really cool. You should turn that into a song." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then just sort of like improvised, "She's a super freaky girl," kind of a thing. And then the song came together in like minutes, essentially, right? They just made it on the fly because they're like, "Oh, that's kind of a cool little riff that you're just like mindlessly tooling around on your guitar." And this becomes the biggest thing. To some degree, this has to be the biggest bitch of having actual talent, right?
Yeah, that's here. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that. Because while on one hand, he was so happy to have that monstrous hit, that was the moment that cemented him into one category, one frame, one cell. Like it was, this was going to be the anchor for his existence from that point on.
Yes.
And it is just,
and
you can tell it's maddening to him.
Well, maddening, but also like it's the song that he didn't give a lot of time, attention, care. It wasn't his baby. It wasn't like the idea that he's like, this is what I was meant to give the world. It was a fucking, oh, here's one last song to throw on the track, because it's like he wasn't even convinced by the do thing. He's like, it's really simple. I don't think I really want to put this on there. But everyone else was like, no, that there's something there. That's catchy. Do that. And he's like, fine. And then it defines him going forward.
Yeah, I know what that's like.
So yeah, that's my takeaway on. Oh, and also going back to the Great White Cane, I wish that had been a hit, because I would have loved to see what he could have done with more complex arrangements, rather than not breaking out until the disco era where things had to get simplified for him. Like punk funk became a thing because he mentions that like he wasn't into disco because it was a little too simple.
That's right.
But punk funk is like 1 foot deep into disco anyway, because that's what that era was.
I mean, disco is essentially an umbrella term for most of that music, right? It just, once they started with Studio 54, that became the sort of iconography of disco. Yeah. But in general, disco is everything.
And so,
at that time.
So it's such dance music. It's a little too repetitive for my taste. Whereas when you listen to the Great White Cane, as flawed as that album is, that music is so much more interesting. Yeah. And I wish he could have launched a career on that rather than disco.
One other thing I enjoy about this period is he's in the room. And when I say in the room, it's sort of an entertainment kind of colloquialism about people who are in interesting studio sessions when great albums were made. They're sort of just in the room in the corner listening, or that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but he's in the room when Marvin Gaye is recording some of his greatest stuff, when, Aretha Franklin, I think there's a tidbit about him being in the room when the Doors were recording something. I don't think it's in this book, but a couple of other bands. And so he's in the room when a lot of this stuff is happening, and people are turning to him, asking questions from the genius, right?
Right.
And it's just a testament to the fact that I do wish the Rick James that's on that album you were referencing had another decade to kind of just experiment and see where he could take this sort of prog funk kind of thing, because I feel like we missed some great music if he was allowed to kind of explore a little more in that fucking area, man. Anyway, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We get to see, of course, the dark side of his meteoric fame, face to face with his demons, the hedonistic lifestyle, which informs much of his art. Thoughts about the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, Dave?
No, just outside of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll were, again, his inability to, which to some degree you can't, but I think by this point in his life, you can blame him less and less, because it's just, I feel like the industry, as we've already mentioned, this is their not well kept secret, right? It's just like, this is how they make rock stars and superstars, and this is how you get through the day. The money that he would spend on the drugs. That's the other thing, is like, he was a multimillionaire over many times
so
over.
Much money.
So much
and this
money.
Is the 70s and 80s when money was money.
I know. and yeah. And he was a millionaire in the 70s and 80s. And he spent it all on drugs. Yeah. All of it. And you have to take a moment to just grasp how many drugs that is.
Yeah, because he's not. That's another thing. That's the whole thing about entertainment, is very little of this lifestyle is done in isolation. So you need people around you who prime the pump, who understand the demon, who feed the demon. And those people also have lifestyles that need to be financed and fed. So, yes, a lot of drugs, but also probably a lot of maintenance money spent around the drugs, which is just also fascinating. I mean, it's sort of its own little cottage industry in and of itself. Anyway. Personal struggles and redemption, of course. We told you he spends quite a bit of time in jail, in prison, in courtrooms, being accused of abusive things, and being in scuffles and tiffs of a professional and personal nature, which is what you expect when you combine this sort of prodigal kind of nature with drugs and the industry of entertainment. It's never going to be linear. It's never going to be clear cut and nice. Right. So he ends up experiencing and causing a lot of chaos.
Right. And I will say, this is part of him though as well, not just the industry, what the industry did to him. It's part of why he fit into the industry. Is he always had this issue with, he never could handle problems of any kind, right? It's like, you were either doing everything he wanted or fuck you. Yeah. And there was no in between. Yeah. It was always one or the other. You were at war, or you were lifting him up on a golden pedestal. And this, because even with his legal problems, a lot of it would just come down to him lashing out, not even fixing the issue after lashing out. The person, he'd just be like, fuck off. I just want to, and you're just sort of like, God, dude, any step of the way, one moment could have changed all of this, and he could never give a shit for long enough. But this goes back to like how he would just drop people if they could not help him out in that moment too. Even the people he liked and wasn't he did in his brain he wasn't doing anything wrong about them. He wasn't wronging them in any way, but it's like, dude, you have to you have to give other people some leeway as well. And he was really god awful at understanding his place with other people and being kind or nice or loving or caring outside of just when he felt like it. And it got him into so many issues down the line.
And with all the drugs, you understand that, well, clearly this person wasn't in his right mind. So, it's not an excuse, of course, but that's one of those sort of, I would expect that from a person who was clearly, quote unquote, medicated out of their mind, probably.
Right, but even when he was younger and not medicated out of his mind quite yet, like this was just something in his personality, like that he never was forced to get better at. It's like he just like he was able to make it without having to fix that personality flaw, and so it just grew and was spotlighted more and more.
Absolutely. All right. Love and relationships. Of course, he was linked with some famous and very famous and infamous women and people in general. There are some curious conversations on the internet about Rick James, the icon. Because I say that because, a lot of these stories are told posthumously, of course, and there's no one around to take issue with them or correct them or add context. If you listen to the legend, this guy was just everything you could imagine that was wrong with Hollywood.
And music with entertainment. But it was also like, you can see why he became obsessed with nothing but drugs and sex is because like that was his life. He lived for it and he never stopped getting it. Like he would just go out into the world and
20 years
sex
later,
dropped on him.
After his greatest hits, he was still Rick James, and people knew that with him they were going to get access to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which just fed the beast. Of course, Tina Marie being his most famous romantic partner. They had some amazing partnerships musically. And then Tamara James was the relationship at the end of his life. And of course,
I would say Linda Blair might be his most famous.
Oh, no. Tina Marie, for sure.
Yeah.
Tina Marie.
I'd never heard of Tina Marie before reading this book.
Yeah, I think most other people have.
I don't.
Linda Blair.
We're both obviously biased on that front, but I suspect Linda Blair because I do think movie stars even movie stars that only really had one mega hit, like there's something about that hits the cultural, like music is a bit more bifurcated in which groups of people know about musicians, whereas movies tend to be a bit more culturally universal, especially back then, where big movies were just big movies.
Well, I'm not saying that Tina Marie is his most famous partner. I'm saying Tina Marie is his most famous relationship. The relationship with Tina Marie is the most notorious, the most famous relationship.
Okay.
But Linda Blair definitely, which is also there's so much media coverage of the relationship between he and Tina and Linda Blair. It's beautiful. If you Google it, some of the headlines just crazy. And
he wrote "Cold-Blooded," the song.
That's right.
All referring to her.
To her, Cold-Blooded. It's such a good song. Anyway, legacy. So, of course, James's genius in his musical life sits centrally as his influence on funk, pop, and punk. Funk punk is sort of undeniable. The book recognizes that much of the sounds of the 80s is a direct result of the work. I do enjoy hearing people talk about James. There's some great interviews online when they talk about what it was like hearing what he was doing in real time, hearing the records when they first came out, and how electrified they were by some of the things he was doing. Also, in terms of a legacy, one really important thing, which you've probably mentioned a little bit here, is the MC Hammer Can't Touch This sampling lawsuit. For those of you who don't know, in early 1990, MC Hammer dropped his monster hit You Can't Touch This, which sampled James's Super Freak. While Hammer initially obtained permission and paid for the rights, a legal spat arose when James claimed the rights had not been adequately cleared and lacked proper compensation. Eventually, they settled out of court with James receiving writing credit and a lovely lump sum. On top of that, many of you may only know Rick James as a meme, honestly. He was mentioned on the Chappelle Show in the early 2000s in this very famous notorious skit where one of the characters is recounting a real event that happened, a number of real events that happened at parties with James in the 70s and early 80s. And they dramatize this, of course, and Rick James ends up coming away looking like this a cartoon character version of Rick James, which is fascinating, but initially he was really upset. He appreciated the humor of it, but he was a little pissed that it was so cartoonish, because he always thought of himself as smooth and suave.
But he was, I mean, you also have to remember the 70s and 80s, like, culture moves on, so that version of what was totally natural then is cartoony now.
Absolutely.
Because the costumes, the attitude, you look at his album covers back then and like they're silly by modern standard. Like you look at it and you're like, what were they thinking?
They're irreverent, they're
it was just
silly, they're garish in many ways.
Yes.
Eye-catching. I mean, that was the point, right? You wanted to catch your eye. Now, real quick, Dave, let's discuss the mention of Prince in the book before we move on here. We gotta discuss a little Prince. What were your thoughts on that stuff?
It made sense. They were both young black men doing different things or wanting to do different things with music. James always, I think, wanted to be the people's person, right? He wanted to be the sex and drugs and have a good time. Like, you just come hang out with me kind of a musician. No matter how much he was or was not, like he only hung out with the elites anyway, for the most part, like once he was an elite. I think that was he wanted his shows to be like, we're bringing you all together in with me. We're having a good time. Prince was never that, right? Prince was like a totally different take on that, where he's like, I am the artist.
That's right.
And I am delivering a performance and a show with meaning or something where it's like, you are watching me.
That's right.
And I think they plainly rubbed each other the wrong way. They had two completely different takes on where music probably should go, what it should do, how it should connect to an audience. Yet they were utter peers coming up at the exact same time, give or take. Rick James hit just before Prince. And by the time because Prince then started opening for James when James was first a big star. And then Prince eventually overtook James in terms of popularity, whereas James started to fade. To Prince's credit, mostly because Prince was the more interesting artist ultimately at the end of the day for longer, I think, than James. Both of them eventually hit that state where they were struggling to find out, like, they had their impact, right? This is what we gave to music. And then by Prince, it was by James, it was the mid to late 80s. And for Prince, it was kind of the mid to late 90s, where they were, when he changed to the symbol, like in desperate search for new meaning, in desperate search for new impact, when sort of that initial impact had come and gone. And it's like, you have changed music. You have given people something they hadn't heard before. Now what you got? And, I think a lot of musicians struggle with that. They're like, no, that was me. That's what I had to give. That's my expression. But yeah, I can see why they rubbed each other the wrong way, because they had completely different takes on what they wanted to do with music.
I think it's important to note. That James is about a decade, maybe a little more older than Prince. So by the time Prince came onto the scene, James was already firmly locked into the pop funk god role, and I think what Prince represented was partially maybe what James thought he should be, in a way, sort of allowed to experiment. We were talking about that prog punk kind of stuff that he kind of started with. So I think a lot of that resentment came from that. It's sort of like, this kid is starting where I kind of started, but he's so openly accepted for this thing. And
now, to be fair, Prince was, from all reports, especially when he was younger, I don't think any of these guys got that much nicer as they got older, but was he a prick when he was young.
Yeah, I mean,
holy shit, was he a prick.
And what's amazing about that too, as a person who is often accused of being a prick, I think
by me,
I love you and Evan. I think a lot of it is just personality type. You interface with this person who's probably guarded because, for whatever reason, so you don't necessarily have all the context. So a lot of people who engage with this person probably just walk away saying he's a prick, simply because the guy, he's one guy. I'm just leave me alone. All of you people, leave me alone.
Although, if it's true that Prince was doing the thing where he was showing up to other people's shows just to leave early on to cause a disturbance, I mean, that is not someone being guarded. That is someone being a fucking prick, if it's true.
I would okay, wait now. How is just me showing up just to hear and then leaving? How is that a prick?
Okay, with your entourage, that you get up to do it as a group, you all get up and go at the same time, and that you do this so often that you are now known for doing it in the music landscape to show that someone doesn't like you and is walking out. I mean, come on, man.
I'm a Prince apologist. Way. I refuse to co-sign that nonsense. Prince had every right to leave with his entourage. Damn.
Sure.
Anyway,
you can listen to the fucking album. You don't have to show up and then just walk out dramatically. I mean, by all reports, Prince was a prick.
Yeah,
so
probably.
There is that.
Anyway, all right. So what about the pairings?
With pairings, you get started. Why yours? Give us talk us through.
So let's see. The process of this wine embraces minimal intervention. The grapes underwent a carbonic maceration, a technique that enhances the fresh fruit character of the wine. As many of you may know, some may not. The method involves fermenting whole clusters and leading.
Actually, say what the wine is, my friend. No, say what the wine is. No one has context. No one has context.
I'm building. I'm building. Hold on.
No.
Wait. Hold on.
All right.
Building. It's like a funk masterpiece. Calm down. Anyway, so
you're saying all the details without them knowing what you're talking about.
Leading to a wine with pronounced fruitiness and high acidity, not unlike our Rick James. I chose the Las Hadas 2024 Nouveau Old Vine. It is 65% Zen and 35% Carignan, or Carignan, as I was corrected recently.
Carignan.
Yeah, sourced from organic vineyards in California's North Coast, regions like Solano County and Suisun. It is plummy. There's lots of cocoa. There's lots of black fruit. The tannins are... So I got two bottles, and the first bottle, Dave, have you tried this yet? You did try this, right?
Not the 2024. Okay. No, that's far too new.
And it was so I was going to go with something much older, of course, but this book really made me sort of, I don't know, it made me a fan of Rick James's just catalog. It really did. So I wanted something that's kind of new because, I'm dipping into his catalog for the first time and really kind of, sitting with it and trying to figure out the sort of ins and outs of where he was, what he was attempting to do. And, a lot of the stuff like that Hollywood song I was telling you about on the Come and Get It record. A lot of the stuff is just really poetic and beautiful, but a lot of it is really acrid and acidic and I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say it. Annoying after a certain point. Clawing. We'll say clawing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And I think this one.
I mean, that's Rick James's music sometimes too. So I'm with you there.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But it is still really satisfying. And this is a great bottle of wine. It's probably going to be even better in about 3 or 4 years. And I'll probably have a deeper respect for James's catalog in a few years as well.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll circle back around. Anyway, that's me, the Los Hadas 2024 Nouveau Old Vine.
And Los Hadas, that's by, who are the winemakers again?
Oh, that is, oh God, I just forgot his name. Their name, Sussman and...
The Comedians.
The Comedians, yes. Their names are...
They're some of the few celebrities that started a winery that like are beloved by the wine world. Like they're very serious. They're very good at what they do.
But they're all they also have like this weird irreverence, I suppose.
Oh, 100%. They're very serious about their wines, but they are comedians. So they are very irreverent about everything they do as well. And they're very minimal intervention. They're very, like, they do very younger, fresher wines.
Yeah.
They're very nouveau in that way, where carbonic maceration in a lot of their wines, very much like a Beaujolais Nouveau style.
Yeah.
So you're always going to get sort of lighter, fresher wines versus the heavier, more hedonistic. Now, on that note,
sorry, Joel Burt and Eric Wareheim, by the way. Sorry.
There you go. Eric Wareheim, Joel Burt. So on the note of hedonistic, though, I went hedonistic. That's where my brain went. Okay. So, and on the topic of all of Rick James's incarceration problems, I had to pair this with the Prisoner 2022 Red Blend. This is a winery that was founded by Dan Finney in 2000, but sold to Constellation Brands in 2019. Oh, yeah. So this is part of the new version or the large Constellation brand ownership of the Prisoner. Though word on the street that just dropped last week is that Constellation is looking to sell its entire wine portfolio this year.
So if anyone wants to get together with us and buy it, we can do it, guys.
yeah. We just need a few hundreds of millions, and we can do it, guys. We can do it. We can do it. And so it might go to a group like Duckhorn or something like that at this point. We shall see. No one is, it's not confirmed that this is going to happen, but it's very likely to happen because no one is denying it either, even though it's been reported everywhere. So that might happen. But for now, the Prisoner, it is a wine brand. It faced minor criticism in 2021 for purportedly fetishizing incarceration on its wine label and other marketing efforts. The company decided against changing the brand's aesthetic due to this but the imagery on its wine label, it's a key aspect of what makes the wine stand out on store shelves. It's also what helped the Prisoner become the best-selling domestic red blend over $25 for the past decade. Wow. Now, it's based on a series of etchings by Spanish artist Francisco de Goya. The Prisoner's flagship label depicts a dark, shadowed man bound by shackles. Created in the 19th century, the de Goya art is believed to represent the violence and inhumanity used against prisoners during numerous Spanish wars. So when Napa winemaker Dan Finney originally launched the Prisoner in 2000, it was an arresting image, one that he received as an art print at the age of 13, and that came to symbolize the brand. Now, we have a quote here. Angela Knott's brand director at The Prisoner said, quote, "As an art-focused brand, we've always believed that art has the power to raise awareness and promote dialogue around difficult conversations. If we can use art to talk about something as important as mass incarceration, something the wine industry doesn't talk about usually, and create a platform for advocacy, that's something we're committed to doing." After the killing of George Floyd, I think a lot of brands began, and this is Angela still talking, I think a lot of brands began to think about how they show up in the world. And as a brand called The Prisoner, we felt compelled to use art as a way to talk about things that are difficult, but we didn't just want to talk about them. We wanted to walk the walk and invest in some of the issues we were talking about. So that year, the company made a $1 million contribution to the Equal Justice Initiative, a nonprofit committed to ending mass incarceration and racial disparity. It also committed to investing $100 million over 10 years in Black and minority-owned businesses within the alcohol beverage industry. In 2022, The Prisoner launched Corrections, a limited edition wine series aimed at driving awareness to mass incarceration and supporting prison reform. Released annually, Corrections is created in partnership with a different artist each year whose work reflects the wine label's cause. This 2022 Red Blend, it's rich, it's bold, red and black bramble fruit, black licorice. It has this smoke and ash. Maybe some people describe it as like a tar flavor, silky tannins. And my God, folks, this is one thing I will give this Prisoner Red Blend above all else. These are the silkiest fucking tannins I have ever experienced in my life. I did not know what the term silky tannins meant until I tried this fucking wine. This is a sweeter wine. Then it's got high alcohol, 15.2%. There is probably, especially under Constellation brands, that it tends to be the way that they leave a little bit of residual sugar in there to make it a little more palatable to most palates. But I will say I finished this whole bottle happily, regardless of the sweetness. It is probably a little sweeter than most wine nerds would think they like, but it is also bold, robust. It's got a lot of earthiness and those tar, smoke, ash flavors that really counteract that sweetness. That first sip, you think that sweetness starts to hit you and you're like, oh, no, this is going to be too sweet. And then it doesn't. It backs off and you get another medley of flavors that really balance the whole thing out. And those tannins are so silky. This is, it's a blend of, much like Dallas's, Zinfandel primarily, and then Cab Sauv, Syrah, Petit Syrah, and Charbono. And Charbono tends to have that smokiness to it a lot of times. So, and it's a Napa favorite up there. So they throw that into the blend. And it's not the same blend year in and year out. Charbono did not used to be part of the blend. It is currently for the 2022 and 2023. So this is those silky tannins. This is a, sweet, sexy wine. It is silky. This reminded me of Rick James. It is a blend, so it's a jam session of all these different flavors and all these different grapes and profiles. And 3% of every bottle of this red blend sold online is donated to a rotating nonprofit supporting prison reform and individuals impacted by the carceral system. Currently, that is the Center for Art and Advocacy that is earning the 3%. This center is committed to prioritizing our formerly incarcerated artists as they develop their skills, innovate within their fields, and take on new leadership roles. This is the official line of the Center for Arts and Advocacy. They look to affirm their value and voice by creating a meaningful space where they can continue growing and thriving. So with all of that, I felt like This is Rick James and what he gave a shit about and what he thought was unfair in his life in a nutshell. And then I think the wine just goes brilliantly with sort of the rich, dulcet tones of a Rick James song.
Nice.
Now, all that said, folks, to wrap us up here, Dallas, what are your final thoughts here?
Final thoughts. Let's see. On the legend of Rick James first. I understand it. I get the complexity of this prodigy, of this genius, of this individual who had some sort of fire in him musically. And in order to express that, it came with the side of alienation of just about everyone else in his life. I don't sit in judgment of that, but I do recognize that it is a one-sided. And on the flip side of that, taking just the canon of his creations, what he managed to do with all of that, what he managed to put into the world, the people he managed to influence, the ripple he sent out into the world creatively and artistically is undeniable, and it's a wonderful and beautiful thing. Even if looking back on it, it seems a little dated and one-dimensional. But it's still a wonderful and beautiful thing, and I'm having fun digging into his catalog right now. As far as the book is concerned, I think it's a really solid biography / autobiography. There's some lore that there were two versions, and one was sort of a little stilted, that was released And eventually
Well, they pushed it out very
they
fast
pushed it out very
when
quickly
he died.
before he
He
allowed.
died, and they were like, biography now, because everyone's going to buy it.
Yeah.
And so it went out in not ideal form.
Yeah, and Ritz, and by the way, a lot of the writing in this is sort of done by Ritz in the voice of James, because he
Right.
was so familiar
Right.
with the cadence, with the manner of speaking,
Right.
and they had so many
And then
hours.
some of the book is actually
And some of it
written,
is
like
actually
letters
written
that Rick James
by
wrote to
James.
Ritz,
That's right.
say, as diary entries, kind of a
That's
thing.
right.
Yeah.
And so I do think it is a great use of the medium. Honestly, like it allows Rick James's authentic voice to come through, but it's also a very adept hand at at actual sort of long form writing. Speaking of Ritz, who's very familiar with the art form of the autobiography and the biography. So, yeah, it's a good one. I'm glad we got to it. Yeah, what you got, Dave?
Yeah.
Wrap us up. Take us home.
So yeah, I will take us home. So I mean, same thing when it comes to the book. It's a really good read. Some of it is because a lot of it is in Rick James's own voice, and Ritz is trying to present James the way James wanted to be presented. There are some gaps, like there are some holes in the story where you're like, okay, they're kind of skirting over a couple things here and there, but for the most part, you're getting a really interesting insight into this guy, and he's a frustrating character. He does not try to hide how frustrating he is either, not really. He even admits to it sometimes, but at the same time, getting into the true background view of what it's like to be this level of celebrity, both wanting to be it, falling into it, and falling out of it, is always one of those things. It's a great cautionary tale for everyone. And just wherever you are in life, whatever station of life you are, just remember you're part of a larger ecosystem, and don't treat people like shit, and don't squander your own talents, and don't. So okay, here on that
or
note,
do. We're all gonna die.
we're all gonna die. So this is a wine show where we just paired wines that we think you should drink while reading this book or listening to Rick James music. So I wanted to take a moment because wine is an alcoholic beverage. This is something that's been on people's minds and been in news and been in upcoming government policy discussions a lot recently, which is alcohol. And let's take a moment to talk about addiction. I've never been addicted to a substance like alcohol or like freebasing cocaine. That has not been something in my history, which to some degree I think is fairly lucky because I do have an addictive personality. You don't become a wine nerd, a comic geek, a cinephile, a bibliophile, any of these files without being more than a little bit obsessive in personality. But back in my college days, I did suffer through an anorexic phase. And actually, I think I was diagnosed officially with having the male equivalent of bulimia, which is intense exercising as the purge part of the binge and purge cycle of having bulimia. You fall into these things, of course, because at first you love the results. You feel great. You think you look great. You're living in a way most others couldn't fathom and accomplishing more than any of them, at least seemingly. Right. But the addiction eventually does overtake everything else. Eventually, you realize you're giving all your time and energy to the addiction. For me, I didn't have any energy left after not eating much and constantly exercising. I'd eat like a dry salad and then have to run for miles immediately afterwards. That was like how my brain thought of it. So then I would fall asleep the moment I stopped moving. I just had no energy for anything. And so eventually you wind up having no life outside of the addiction. Like you can't watch things, you can't read things, you can't enjoy life. You like being social is such a chore, it's such a strain. If you've never experienced being trapped in a truly self-destructive addiction that you physically become dependent on, it sucks. It is terrible. I had to get off campus. I had to move back in with my parents for a year during college, see a nutritionist, just the whole 9 yards. Other people were required to break me of that cycle. So to this day, I'm still an intermittent faster. I still lean towards those old bad practices that feel so much better to me than less extreme habits. That line that you trip over into addiction, it's always right fucking there, just waiting for you to trip back over it for the rest of your life. which I have no doubt Rick James could attest to all the way to his dying day.
He did.
So today, talking about a man whose life and talent were seriously impacted by addiction, and alcohol being one of those addictions, even if not the most dire, I wanted to give more than just lip service to the importance of recognizing how many people struggle with drinking alcohol in moderation. Humanity is not known for doing this easily or even mostly. Even within the industry, the level of alcoholism is something of a non-secret secret. We imbibe more than we should regularly. Many people cannot drink regularly and keep their intake moderate. I understand that right now the beverage and alcohol industries are fighting a neo-prohibitionist movement, or what we like to call a neo-prohibitionist movement, that is using faulty science and hyperbole to demonize alcohol beyond its actual dangers. But that doesn't eliminate its actual dangers. Saying just consume everything in moderation doesn't make dangerous additives or trans fat or corn syrup in food any more okay. The use of all of these in our diets has lowered thanks to so many sounding the alarms and companies using less of these substances, not because people just stopped consuming them on their own free will. Like, that usually is a recipe for disaster. Just expecting people to be able to moderate their habitual behaviors is never a solution, not one that works. So please, to everyone out there, give this issue more than lip service. Lift up attempts to help people moderate their alcohol consumption. Cheer those attempts on. Talk about them with interest and hope. Don't wait for someone to call you out on it before you simply say, oh, well, of course, that's okay. Of course, it should always be moderate, blah, blah, blah. If someone has to stop and ask you that in order for you to verbally support sobriety or moderation, that is too little too late. We can lift up wine as a craft and artisan product while also fully embracing new ways to keep wine from affecting lives negatively. If wine is truly about connection and bringing people together, like we love to say, we have to care about people above the wine. If it reads as though you don't, then I'm sorry, you're just full of shit. Thus endeth this lesson. And that's going to wrap us up.
Very nice. Very nice. That, yeah, very nice. Good way to end it, Dave. We didn't speak a whole lot about his addiction, but it is clearly a very thick vein in his life, and maybe ruined some of his genius in lots of relationships. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful.
And on that note, this has been another episode of Vintertainment. I hope you were Vintertained.
I hope you were
Vintertained. As well as Vinteducated.
Vinteducated. We'll go with that.
Vinteducated. Yeah. That sounds very vegetable, but okay, cool. We will be back in 1 week for another wine and entertainment pairing for your entertainment. Actually, next week will probably be a fun interview special episode. Yeah. So look for that dropping next week. But we will be back with another wine and entertainment pairing for your entertainment very soon. Take care, guys. Cheer those on who are looking for sobriety and moderation. Drink in moderation yourself if you do enjoy, like we do, because we do. And God bless you if you are one of those people like us who can drink in moderation and not have a problem with it, because having suffered through something that I suck at moderating myself, like, it is hard. Mm-hmm. And you don't know. I think that's the last thing I will say. Yeah. You don't know what someone else's struggle is like. Like, even if you struggle, quote unquote, to not overdo something, you don't know to what level how difficult it is for someone else to do the same. The amount of effort you put in to do it might still be exponential scales less than what someone else has to do for that same moderation. So stay human, stay empathetic, be sympathetic as well. And cheers, everyone. We will talk to you next week.